I love maps. Maybe you like maps too. Remember the days when we would actually pull a map, like a physical paper map out and figure out how to get to where we needed to go? Robin and I had the opportunity to spend some time with Bill and Linda Gertis, and we were traveling some places with them, and we got in the car, and they pulled out a map and opened it up and figured out the route, closed it, put it away, and we went. I was like, what is this? Like, we don't do that anymore, right? We pull out our phone, type in the directions, plug it into the car, and it takes us to where we're supposed to go. Unless you go to Anamosa Middle School, like we did yesterday, and the roads were closed. See, we should just put these phones away. They're silly. They don't even take us where we need to go. But maps, we open them up, and I remember as a kid just opening up a map and just looking at all the different places. Where could we go? How do we get there? What does that look like? And so, we open up maps for the purpose of figuring out where to go. And not only figuring out where to go, but how to get there. The way we need to go. And this morning, we're going to talk about and see about Jesus being the way. And so if you have a Bible, I'd love for you to open it up to John chapter 14. John chapter 14. We're going to be looking at verses 1 to 7 this morning as we are taking this fall to look at the last teaching of Jesus that he gave to his disciples before he was crucified. And as we do this, we're going to see much of what he wanted his disciples to know and what he wants us to know as we continue forward in this message. And so if you don't have a Bible, we have Bibles in the pew back in front of you. You can grab one of those and turn to page, I think it's 900. And I would love for you to have a Bible in front of you where you can see what God's Word is declaring to us this morning. So would you please stand as we honor the reading of God's Word. John chapter 14, beginning at verse 1. Jesus says this, "Let not your hearts be troubled. Believe in God, believe also in me. In my Father's house are many rooms. If it were not so, would I have told you that I go to prepare a place for you? And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and will take you to myself, that where I am you may be also. And you know the way to where I am going." Thomas said to him, "Lord, we do not know where you are going. How can we know the way?" Jesus said to him, "I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. If you had known me, you would have known my Father also. From now on you do know him and have seen him." This is the word of the Lord. You may be seated. So, a little bit of context. That might be a familiar passage to you. Maybe you've heard it at a funeral or other places before. But Jesus, as he's leading up to this, has been declaring, in a sense, and John has been writing to an audience that is particularly a Jewish audience to say, this guy, this Jesus, he is the one that we've been waiting for. He is the Messiah. He is the one that we are called and need to trust and to believe, to repent and to follow. And up until the first 12 chapters, the Apostle John has been writing to say, this is the one. And then in chapters 13 to 17, we get what I've just talked about, the final teaching. And in this teaching, John has been writing and Jesus has been declaring what it looks like for people to follow him after he leaves, because Jesus is going away. So what does it look like to follow him? And how will we be able to continue to bring this message to bear that he has been declaring? And in the verses right before the verses that I read this morning, the things that we covered last week, if you weren't here with us last week, or if you were, just a reminder, Jesus has been telling his disciples, love one another. This is what you're going to need to do after I leave. And he's told them, I'm leaving. And then he tells them, love one another. And the apostles and the disciples are like, wait a second. Where are you going? What's going to happen now? What is this going to look like? And so Jesus, instead of diving further into love one another, which he's going to talk about later, he goes, okay, I'm going to go with what you're concerned about. Let's talk a little bit more about where I am going and what this means. And he tells them, I am the way and the truth and the life. Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. And so because he is this, Jesus says, don't be troubled. Don't be troubled. The current state of the disciples is one of confusion and trouble, and they are not putting the dots together of what Jesus has been declaring to them about what is going to happen next. And so what does Jesus tell them? At the beginning of this section, he tells them, let not your hearts be troubled. Now, if Jesus were to stop right there and just say, don't let your hearts be troubled, he would be like this great late night skit with Bob Newhart, where Bob is the psychologist meeting with somebody, and every time somebody comes in to say their troubles, his one counsel to them was, stop it. Stop it. And so a woman comes in and I have this fear of being buried alive in a coffin. And so what's his response? Stop it. Don't do that anymore. And she's kind of flabbergasted, and then she reels off all these different other things that she's struggling with, and everything that she's struggling with, what is his response? Stop it. And she's so frustrated and angry with him that he eventually says, stop it, or I'm going to bury you alive in a coffin. Now, if Jesus just said, don't worry, don't be troubled, and just went on, he would just be like Bob Newhart. But Jesus doesn't stop there. He provides a balm. And before I show you that balm, let's remember a little bit of the historical context and notice what is so interesting here. Jesus is about to be, in a few short hours, Jesus is going to be betrayed, denied, tried, and crucified. He knows this is what's going to happen to him. And so what does he start to do? He starts to bring comfort to his disciples. If you know that in a few short hours you're going to die, do you want people to comfort you, or do you want to comfort others? I think we people would want to be comforted. But that's not what Jesus does. Jesus sets about to comfort his disciples in the moments when he is about to be taken away. So Jesus begins to help them to not be troubled with him leaving by telling them, not only don't let your heart be troubled, but believe in me. Again, this is going to be expounded on, so it isn't just believe and all will be well, but trusting or believing Jesus is necessary and the beginning step for our hearts not to be troubled. It's through belief. So what are they to trust? What are they to believe? They're to believe God, to believe Jesus. Remember, he's talking to a Jewish audience primarily, so the idea of believe God, that's not anything new. They would say they do, but here again, Jesus is and will continue to show them that by believing in him means that's what it means to believe in God, which means the opposite is true. If you don't believe Jesus and that he is the way to the Father, then you don't believe God. It's both. Believing Jesus, believing God is one in the same. And so he continues to show them that this is what this means. Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. And next he continues to help them not be troubled by telling them he's preparing a place for them. Jesus is preparing a place for you. Jesus is going to be crucified. The disciples are on the brink of catastrophic failure. And so Jesus, while comforting them, what does he do? He points them to the future. He's not pointing them to right now. He's pointing to them down the road. Now, when we read this, that Jesus is going to prepare a place for us, we need to take out of our mind this idea of Jesus being like Bob the Builder. Okay, he's not returning to the Father with his hammer and hard hat and starting to build a house or a mansion, if you are reading the King James Version, or he's not tidying up this room and painting it like we're painting the hallways downstairs. He's not preparing it for it in that way. We need to take that out of our minds if we're going to really understand what's happening here. And so what is Jesus saying in this passage about preparing a place? Well, first of all, the point of what Jesus is saying here is to bring encouragement and comfort. Jesus is still going to leave, and he left. But the reason and the way of his leaving is to provide what they will need to continue after he's gone. It's to give them hope. And so Jesus gives a metaphor. And the metaphor is God has a big, big house with lots and lots of rooms, a big, big table with lots and lots of food, a big, big yard where we can play football, a big, big house. It's my Father's house. Little hat tip to Audio Adrenaline, 1990s Christian rock anthem. Big house. But that's not what he's doing. The point of what Jesus is saying is that he is talking about a house or a mansion. Again, that's the King James translation. He's not talking about these things in particular. He's using a metaphor. And one unfortunate result of the King James using an error of a translation in mansions is that too often we can think of what is going to be heaven in a temporary mindset. We think of it as this place or this building or this elaborate thing, structure. And that's not the point. We need to think less of a big house or a mansion with lots of rooms and more about the point of the metaphor. And the point of the metaphor is it is a description of a place where those who believe in God will dwell with him because of Jesus in his presence. That's the point. In an audience this size, the house, the home, can have a lot of different feelings. So when Jesus uses this metaphor, for some of you here, and maybe some of you kids here this morning, home is a great place. You want to be there. It's a place of comfort. It's a place of safety. It's a place of calm. For others of us, it's not. It's scary. It's hard. It's a place, maybe when you were a child, it was the last place you wanted to be. Get me out of here as quickly as I can. So whether home was a place of comfort or home was a place of difficulty, Jesus is using the metaphor of a home because I think everybody can understand a place that is welcoming and a place we want to be. It's a place that is comfort and care and help. And that's the point. So why does Jesus talk about a house and a rooms? Well, he talks about a dwelling place, which is probably a better translation, because it's where he is. It's not about the house. It's not about the mansion. It's not about the rooms. It's about being in a dwelling place with God. That's the point, to draw a relatable connection that helps us to see where God is. And he uses this metaphor because it's something that we can relate to, we can grasp onto. But that's not the point. Because God's dwelling place is far more than whatever we could imagine or understand. But he's trying to give us something that we can hang on to. And the second item that I want us to see is in verses 2 and 3 is the idea of preparation and what Jesus' metaphor of preparation is. Again, preparation doesn't mean that Jesus is constructing or remodeling a nice room for those who are his, even though at times we have this flippancy, which I think we should guard against, of like, oh, I can't wait to get to my mansion. Or my room is going to be so lit, like I can't wait. Like there's a flippancy in that, and I think we need to distance ourselves from that, because the focus is not on what we receive, but who we receive. Church, far too often in Western Christianity, we are consumed with temporary blessings and not eternal blessings. Too often we want God to give us things that we want. If I have these things, then I will have what I need. And that even drifts into our thoughts about eternity. We want a really cool house. We want an amazing room. We can't wait for that. We want to sit down and talk to the people who are in heaven that died before us, the family and the friends, and we just want to have a great time together. Church, that immensely pales in comparison to what it will be. We're not going to be thinking a whole lot about the things that we think about here, like, oh, I can't wait to talk to my mom or my dad. I can't wait for whatever. No, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be staring at Jesus. And the things that we think, I can't wait to ask God about this situation in my life, it's going to be gone. We're not going to worry about it anymore, because we're with Jesus. And so I think this is vital for us to think through as it relates to this. Think about this question. If you could have everything you want for all of eternity, but Jesus isn't there, do you want it? Or maybe even turn that around. If you didn't have everything that you think you would want for all of eternity, but you have Jesus' presence, are you satisfied? See and savor Jesus. Now, our mindset might begin to change, I think, if we thought about eternity in how the place is prepared. How did Jesus prepare this place? See, the idea of preparation includes with it this idea of going. Jesus is saying, I go to prepare a place for you. He is driving at the going. The going is what happens on the cross when he dies, in the resurrection when he rises, and ascension when he goes to the Father. This is what is preparing the place for his followers. This is the act of preparation. Jesus is going through death, preparing the way so that we will be with him. Look at how verse 3 ends. I will come again and will take you to myself, that where I am, you may be also. Jesus, in his death, resurrection, and ascension, prepares a place for us. And though it has been 2,000 years, Jesus has promised that he is coming back to take to himself those who are his. We don't know when that's going to happen. We don't know exactly how that's all going to be played out, but the result of him coming again will be to take to himself those who are his. And so please listen closely to this. I think this makes all the difference and begins to help us think and understand who God is and what he is displaying to us in Jesus. This is what Jesus is saying. Jesus' desire for us to be with him is greater than our desire to be with him. Did you catch that? We think, I can't wait to be with Jesus. Guess what? Jesus' desire for you to be with him is even greater than your desire to be with him. Now, how can I say that? Because what Jesus did to prepare a place for us. He went through death so that we would be with him. Isn't that amazing? He wants us to be with him. The going to prepare a place for us can only happen through the horrific cross. Jesus is saying these things to fortify the disciples and now us, that one day we will be home with him. We will not be separated forever. And he finishes verse 4 by reminding them, you know the way to where I am going. You know what's going to happen. Jesus has not been coy in his whole ministry. He has been telling them what is going to be happening. He's made it clear. And all along, he's been trying to help them see, but they have not understood because they don't understand yet that Jesus and only Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. So in verse 5, we see confusion, and Jesus doesn't want us to be confused. Don't be confused. And this time, we don't have Peter who's speaking up. We have Thomas. Poor Thomas, right? If you ever played those get-to-know-you games, where you have to come up with an adjective for yourself so that people remember you. It usually starts with your same letter of your first name. Well, here it would be, we know Thomas by what? Doubting Thomas. Poor guy. Like, he's not so much a doubter as I relate to Thomas because he's a realist, right? He thinks about everything literally. And we see that in his life. In John 11:16, he responds to Jesus, telling his disciples, hey, let's go to where Lazarus has been buried. And with all the chaos that's been happening around them, Thomas knows, wait a second, if we go to where Lazarus is buried and we're going to make a scene there and the people don't like Jesus, this might very well end in our death. And he says in John 11:16, let us also go that we may die with him. He thinks they're going to die. It's a bad situation. In John chapter 20, the point that Thomas is known for when he speaks up and says after Jesus has raised from the dead, unless I see his hands and mark and the mark of his nails and place my finger into the mark of the nails and place my hand into his side, I will never believe. Why does he say this? Because dead people don't come back to life, right? That's what he knows. And now, of course, there's the necessity of faith. But Thomas is looking at situations as he knows them, and he's responding that way. And so when Jesus says, you know the way to where I am going, Thomas first states, we don't know where you're going. Where are you going? But Jesus just told them. He's told them where he's going. Most likely, Thomas, again, is being literal. And he's thinking, where is this house that you're preparing? Where is this mansion? Where is this room? Show us. Then Thomas leans into the realistic lens and too literally says, how can we know the way? How do we get there? Thomas and most of the other disciples are thinking that there's some roadmap. Show us the Rand McNally. Show us the Google map. Show what road are we supposed to be taking to get to where you're going? They're confused. What about us? Do we hear these things that Thomas is saying? His confusion about what Jesus declares and wonder as well, Jesus, what's the way? As things are difficult in life and the difficulties mount, Jesus, what is the way? I don't get this. Friends, what Jesus says isn't always easy to understand, and so are we confused about him? Are we confused about his ways? Are we confused about how to live? Jesus' way is not their way, but Jesus provides the way which answers these questions. Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. And he's how to know the Father. He's how we know the Father. Here we arrive at the exclusivity of Jesus. Verse 6 is key and so important for us to know what Jesus is saying. Jesus' statement is a response to someone who does not understand. We don't understand what you're saying. And so his response is to that. Let me bring out the clarity in the midst of the fog and the confusion. And as we continue in John's gospel, Jesus is going to continue to explain the way to belong and to be with him. But for now, his he succinctly helps Thomas and us to understand and encompass the way. What is the way? Jesus says, first of all, I am the way. There isn't some path or highway or map. It is him, Jesus. He himself, his life, death, and resurrection, his ascension is the way. There is no other way. The way he is going is not our way. He's preparing the way, but he is the way for us to be where he is. And it is only because Jesus is the truth and the life that he can be the way. Because he's the truth, because he's the life, then he is the way. And so the question for all of us is, are we trusting Jesus as the way for our lives? Because he says, you can trust me because I'm the truth and the life. And so let's look at what that means. Second, Jesus is the truth. We live in a day in our culture where the culture is constantly telling us, and you will hear these phrases, you be you, you do you, live your truth, be true to yourself. And what that mantra is declaring over and over is that we determine our truth internally. I'm going to decide what my truth is, and whatever I decide my truth is, that's the truth. Now, the problem is when my internal decision of what the truth is and your internal decision of what the truth is come at odds. What do we do then? This is my truth. You're saying that's your truth. They're in total conflict with one another. What's the truth? This is an example of how this is played out today. Just as it relates to gender. If I believe that gender is determined biologically, then I will say something like, well, you should go to the bathroom of your biological gender. But if I say, I think that gender is determined internally, that I decide what gender I am, then I would say, you should be able to go to any bathroom you feel you should go to. Now, what happens when the two are at odds? What's the truth? By the way, our biological gender determines the truth in this scenario. But it doesn't just land in cultural norms. This lands in the church, not particularly what I just talked about, but it lands in the church. It lands in all of our culture in that truth becomes what I define, and therefore my truth is the means or the way to be a part of a group. So my tribe, my group believes this, and whatever my group says, the people that I like, well, that's true. That's internal. When we hold what other people say because we like them or what they're saying, and we're not driving back to the external reality that Jesus is the truth, we're in trouble. Jesus is the truth. And so if the truth is determined by something external, outside of us, then we have something to anchor our thinking, our lives, everything in. Students, kids, like everybody, we're getting bombarded constantly that the truth is internal. And Jesus is saying one of the most exclusive claims ever in saying, I am the truth. The truth is not internal, the truth is external. There is a truth, and it is found in a person. Jesus is the truth. Our culture does not like this. But this is nothing new. In John chapter 18, right before Jesus is crucified, He's having a conversation with Pilate, who has the ability to crucify him or not. And there's this interaction. So then Pilate said to them, So you are a king? Jesus answered, You say that I am a king. For this purpose I was born, and for this purpose I have come into the world, to bear witness to the truth. Everyone who is of the truth listens to my voice. Pilate said to him, What is truth? For thousands of years, we have been asking the question, what is the truth? And Jesus leaves no wiggle room here. He says, I am the truth. He is the external standard of truth. He is truth incarnate. He is the revelation of God who is always true. It says in the beginning of the book of John, I'm just staying in this book, in John chapter 1, starting at verse 14. He says, And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we have seen his glory, glory as of the only Son from the Father, full of grace and what? Truth. Verse 17, For the law was given through Moses, grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. Do you want to know what's true? Look at Jesus. Believe Jesus alone. It won't be easy, but having an external anchor of truth will stabilize us internally through the ever-changing whatever of our culture and the ever-changing nature of ourselves. We're constantly changing, thinking differently. But Jesus is the anchor. And this isn't just for the ones who don't believe. When Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life, that's not for just those that might not believe Jesus. That's for all of us here this morning. He's saying, look at me as the definition of truth. It will be your steady anchor. And third, Jesus is the life. This is what Jesus says of himself. I am the life. If you were with us last week, I mentioned that the book of John, the thesis statement of the book of John is at the end of the book of John. John chapter 20, verse 31. This is a great one to remember. But these are written so that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have what? Life in his name. That's where life is found. Jesus is where true and abundant life is found. This is not a new message to the book of John. John has stated this over and over in writing about him and in quoting Jesus. John chapter 1, verse 4. In him was life, and that life was the light of men. John chapter 11, starting at verse 25. He says this. Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live. And everyone who lives and believes in me shall never die. Do you believe this? This is the most essential question to answer. Do you believe that Jesus is where life is found? Do you really want to live? Do you want to live out why God has placed you on this earth? To truly live means that our life is wrapped up in his life, consumed with Jesus, who is life. So are we consumed with Jesus? By him saying, I am the way, the truth, and the life, he is essentially saying, be consumed with me, because that's where you will find truth and life and the way to the Father. Jesus then leaves no doubt about it. He and he alone is the only way to the Father. No one comes to the Father except through me. The most exclusive of statements. The common adage in our world today is many paths lead to the same destination. You can believe whatever you want to believe, but as long as you believe it strongly, you're going to make it to heaven with God. Jesus throws that out the window. It's not true. This is how Thomas à Kempis in the 1400s said it. In a sense, quoting Jesus, follow thou me, I am the way and the truth and the life. Without the way, there is no going. Without the truth, there is no knowing. Without the life, there is no living. I am the way which thou must follow, the truth which thou must believe, the life for which thou must hope. I am the inviolable, the constant way, the infallible way, the never-ending life. I am the straightest way, the sovereign truth, life true, life blessed, life uncreated. Church, when we follow the way and teaching of Jesus and we live in love and grace and we tell somebody that Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life, we are not bigoted. We're just saying what Jesus said. That's what Jesus said of himself. And he wraps all of this up in verse 7, and he tells us that he is the way not only to come to the Father, but the way to know the Father. See, Jesus and the Father are one. The Bible clearly declares to us that there are three persons, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, and one God. Three persons, one God. This last week, I got a little knock on my door at like 8 o'clock when it was really hot outside. And I opened the door, and there's two young men in white shirts and ties standing at my door. And they said, "Hey, we're so-and-so. Can we share a story with you?" I'm like, "Yeah, let's do this." Like, "Hey, if you share a story with me, can I share a story with you?" And they're like, "Sure. All right, let's go." Like, and so we sat outside on my porch for an hour talking about what those who are part of the Church of Latter-day Saints believe, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and what I believe the Bible is declaring. And as we went around and talking to each other, at one point in the conversation, I said, "Okay, here's the most important question. Who is Jesus?" And they're like, "Yeah." I said, No. Who is Jesus? "Well, Jesus is our brother. Jesus was created by God." I said, wait. That's the difference. Jesus is eternally existing. He was not created by the Father. He has been eternally existing from eternity past. I took him to Colossians chapter 1, read 15 to 20, and it says that he is before all things. So if he's before all things, there can't be anything before him, which means he's eternal, which means he wasn't created. And I got them talking and thinking, and at one point, he's like, "Well, I believe what you believe." I said, "No, you don't." "Well, maybe I'm not just saying what the church's doctrine is." "Maybe you're not. So this is my encouragement to you." I said to him, "Read the book of John. And then ask the question, who does Jesus say he is?" They said, "All right, we'll do that." Like, cool. I said, "Would you do something?" "Sure." "Would you read just the introduction to the Book of Mormon?" "Sure, I'll do that." "But you got 21 chapters to read. I got a little introduction." And by the way, they use the Bible. That's the problem. They read it wrong. Jesus clearly says who he is, that he is one with the Father, that he is God. Jesus is the revelation of who God is. By knowing Jesus, we know the Father. John Owen in the 1600s says, "Without Christ, we would have known nothing truly about God, for he would have been eternally invisible to us." We don't know God without knowing Jesus. Do you want to know God? Do you want others to know God? Behold Jesus. Do you know where you're going? Do you know how to get there? What map are you using? Rand McNally, Google, Apple, whatever. Jesus says, "I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me." So behold Jesus.